to round one here. So I'll re-ask the question, but I'm gonna spit it out better this time. I'm gonna, like, as my drama teacher taught me, like, I'm gonna take a break. This is for you, Miss Bice. I'm taking a break right now. I'm gonna enunciate and speak slowly. Is there a difference?
I think we need to tell Diane that we are practicing here for a blooper reel.
Oh, good.
Don't turn the camera off, no matter what.
My favorite.
Right. Yeah, I don't know that we're practicing. We're actively in the middle of it.
We're making for real. I'm doing my best.
Writers, readers, drinkers, lend me your ears and your livers. Welcome to Writers Drinking Whiskey Open Bar, the show where sometimes we reuse openings just like this one, where we go open bar and speak like pirates. I am your host, William R. Hincy, and joining me today. Thank you. Like, I like to reuse them sometimes because I'm unprepared today. But I have a brilliant panel with me here, so let's introduce everyone. So I'm going to go left to right on my screen because I'm not a smart man, and that's the easiest way for me to go. So let's start with you, SJ Roseanne. Welcome to the show. And I did want, though, to make sure we had some introduction here. If you want to just tell us kind of what's your latest work, that's either out or that you're working on, whatever you like to, feel comfortable talking about. And then what is your biggest literary turnoff?
Turn off. Okay.
Turn off.
And I go first, huh? Thanks. Put it back to you. Yeah, my newest book is a co-written book with John Shenyan Nee. It's called The Murderer of Mr. Ma, set in London, 1924, with Judge Dee. You all remember Judge Dee, and Lao She, who was an actual Chinese novelist, running around London, solving crimes and using a lot of kung fu. So that's my latest book, and I'm working on the next in the series. And my biggest literary turnoff is pretension. It's people who, for example, claim they're not writing crime. They're writing a literary novel with crime in it. They're not mystery writers. They are, they're not science fiction writers. They're just using the tropes to forget it. Real pain.
Right. Amen. Thank you for that. Dario, you want to take us from there?
Yeah, SJ just blew me away with that turn off, and I love it, and I want to comment on it after.
Of course. Comment on it now. Feel free.
I'm Dario Ciriello. I've written 2 novels and 2 nonfiction books and a collection of short stories, and I'm a freelance editor, which is what I do most of the time. Turn off. So, boy, where to start? I could be really mean and say people like Dan Brown, or I could be
mad. He has millions of dollars. He's not mad.
I could say writers who fail to make me care. But I got to pick up on SJ here with the pretentiousness and I have to say, although she's a brilliant writer, and I'm going to name names here. Oh my God, and my senior brain has forgotten her name. Oh my God. Okay, so
it's the muses saying, "Don't do it, don't do it." She's a perfectly good person.
Very, very famous literary writer who insists her work is not science fiction, but it's palpably science fiction. She's a huge name, has won all the awards. Did she
win?
I'm sorry?
Ursula Le Guin?
No. She's a real science fiction writer. She was proud of it. Did she write The Handmaid's Tale? Gosh, I can't remember.
Atwood? Margaret Atwood?
Atwood, but she admits to it also, doesn't she?
No, she doesn't. She always denies she's a science fiction writer.
Really? Oryx and Crane?
Yep.
The children? No, she didn't know that.
The interviews I've seen, anyway.
Wow.
So, feel free to edit this out if it's too controversial, if it's going to get you hate mail, but that's my shoot.
No, I mean, it might get you hate mail because I Here at Writers Drinking Whiskey, we love writers of all types, especially when you come on our show. Well, fair enough. Thanks for that, Dario. Tim, you want to take it from there?
Oh yeah, I write as TD Johnston, and nobody calls me that. I played quarterback in high school, but I didn't earn the TD nickname as a football player. Sorry to say. Touchdown Johnston, yeah. No, yeah, I'm Tim Johnston. But there is another Tim Johnston whom I know, who has been out there longer than I have. And I chose, when I started publishing about, I don't know, 15 years ago, my first published story. I went with my initials. So don't call me TD. But I have two short story collections. With the first was Friday Afternoon and Other Stories, which helped me get an agent because I won the International Book Award for Best Short Fiction with that collection. Got me an agent for novels, believe it or not. My second collection is called Waiting for Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower is not in the title story or anywhere else in the collection, but the title of that story
one
felt like it worked for the title of the book. And my first novel, which is behind me on this big board that goes with me to events and bookstores and whatnot, is Reciprocity. And that is a crime thriller that came out 2 years ago, was optioned by Universal as a television series, multi-season television series for streaming. And has been knocked back off of that level by the strikes that happened last year. Universal canceled, as did other studios, some large projects. This was to be a large project, lots of characters, multiple locations, and it did make the first round of cuts. But then 2 months ago, I got word that the option is going to expire, that the four main streamers, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, and Peacock, all passed. So Universal let the option expire, and the rights are back with me. Any of you know a big producer, they can have it. Yeah.
It's so cool that you got that far. That's amazing.
It was a surprise. Yeah, my agent called on a Friday night. She's great. And she said, Eric LaSalle, who's been on your show, loved the novel, wanted to pitch it to the suits at Universal as a television series that he wanted to produce and direct. And it took off that way. So the strikes couldn't have come at a worse time. Sure. You feel a little bit like you're approaching the peak of Mount Olympus as an indie writer. Something like that happens that you don't think is going to happen. And so then later on, you think to yourself, okay, am I better off? It's sort of, is it better to have loved and lost, right?
Sure.
I don't know, because for a good 2 weeks, I was devastated. And then you wake up and you get back to work and you move on.
Yeah.
Good.
So cool.
Yeah, so your literary turnoff is people not like optioning things and not turning that into an actual production.
Yeah, right. Exercise the option, please.
So common. Oh my God, it's so common.
But as far as a literary turnoff, I really dislike unnecessary description. Painting landscapes or city streets for no reason that contributes to the story. I'm not big on that. I like to write description, but only if I feel like it advances the story.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Awesome. Thank you for that. We talked about that a bit Monday too. Yeah. So and I'll link them up here. So what I do actually when you guys are talking is, if I remember right, everyone will have the link to their episode up here. You'll have two, Tim. I'll use the latest one. As we start promoting that one. But yeah, so I'll link it up. So we've talked about that a little bit more in depth, Monday. So thanks so much for that. So Jesse, you want to take us from there?
Yeah, so very cool to hear all your stories. I am a fiction writer, poetry writer, poet, and I'm working on two different projects. One of which I'm posting online as I go on Medium. It's so like every time I finish a section or a chapter, I post it. So it's just kind of developing, and I'm putting it out there as it's developing, which is kind of an interesting thing. And that one's about the story that takes place during the beginning of the pandemic. So I'm exploring a lot of those issues that came up for us all, that project. And then I have another like kind of on the road project, which I'm just doing quietly, privately on my own. And then I'll probably shop it around when it's finished. I had my first traditionally published short story come out the beginning of September, which was really cool. And then I have a poem coming out. Yeah, that's really cool. And I have a poem coming out November 1st, which I'm also excited about. But apart from that, I'm just a person on the grind.
Very
Cranking
good.
it out. I mean, I love it. I think someone had said earlier, you said, Tim, about, just, you still kind of get up and you have to do it. And so that's it. I'm always writing. I have to write. I feel the compulsion to write all the time.
Yeah, that's a good compulsion. And when you think, oh, I'm never going to write again, and for about 2 weeks, I kind of felt that way. You remember the words of Walt Disney: "Keep moving forward." And we writers, that's what. Yeah, yep. SJ, Walt Disney said that. Yeah. My wife and I got married at Disney World. She is a huge, lifelong Disney fan. I had not been, really in either direction. 13 years old, went to Disney World for a half a day with my family. That was it. And then I find myself getting married at Disney World, and I can't count the number of times I've been there since. That I know some Disney quotes.
Yeah.
I've always liked that one. Keep moving forward. Whether things are going well for you, so ride the momentum, or not. That's one step at a time. Keep moving forward. It's how we write. We don't always feel like it. The compulsion's not always there, but the routine should be.
That's why it's so comforting to be a writer. I feel like a lot of other people who I know who are not writers may not understand that insane routine that I have, but I know you guys all do.
Right.
And I would say that my biggest literary turnoff, and I know this is kind of like a necessary evil, but blurbs. I really get annoyed by it. For a long time, I was reading only like classic lit, and so I was avoiding blurbs. But for the last, I'd say year, I've been really steeped in contemporary writing, and it's just all these like couldn't put it down, best book ever. Changed my life. I'll never forget that. It's like, oh God, guys, come on. Every book can't be like this. But I also get that, like, it helps sell books, but just in
Yeah. I get it completely. Am I on mute, or did I unmute myself?
I can hear you.
Okay, very good. Because sometimes like the dogs do something and I mute it, and then I forget like that I muted it, and so then I start talking and say, "Oh, here it's not working." And now with everyone here, I'm like, "Okay, how's it?" See, we're making this going to be great for the blooper episode. So thanks for that suggestion.
This whole one is going to be a blooper episode.
Very true. That's funny that you mentioned that, Jesse, because in the last book, A Fire for Christmas, all the blurbs are fictionals. And my mom does it. Like, the one from my mom isn't even real. Like, it goes like, Riot, the greatest book ever. And then it goes, Mom. My mom never even said that. It's just...
I remember that. It made me laugh so hard. I loved it.
Let's get to you, Dan. So I was going around. Everyone mentioned their last book and then their literary turnoff. So if you want to jump right into the fray, you can tell us what you're working on, or you can talk about whatever the last book was published. Completely up to you. And then what's a literary turnoff? We'll go from there.
Okay. My last book published was called Friday's Harbor. It was a second in a 2-part series. And it came out in gosh, I think it was 2015, something like that, pretty close to that. And there are 4 other books too that preceded it, and I never remember dates for the release of any of them. Literary turnoff, overly wordy writing, florid writing when it's not useful, when it doesn't accomplish anything, is probably my biggest turnoff. Thanks for asking that.
No problem. Thanks for that. It's funny, Tim had mentioned that his was specific to descriptions, but it was kind of that same thing. So, yeah, I'll be right with you. Oh, hello. Fancy meeting you here on the show I host and edit. William R. Hincy. I'm taking a break from my hosting gig at Writers Drinking Whiskey to look oh so stylish and oh so suave in my Firmoo glasses. As you guessed it, that is today's sponsor. If you'd like to get a 50% off already affordable glasses with tons of selection, you can use the promo code maybe here if you're on the YouTube box and you see my hands. If you're listening on a podcast, you can find it in the description. So check out the link, get your 50% off, support the show, and support restocking the bar behind me because it is an expensive chore to keep that puppy up. Thanks, everyone. And as we used to say in the 80s, back to your regularly scheduled programming. To round 1 here. So I'll re-ask the question, but I'm going to spit it out better this time. I'm going to, like, as my drama teacher taught me, like, I'm going to take a break. This is for you, Miss Vice. I'm taking a break right now. I'm gonna enunciate and speak slowly. Is there a difference?
I think we need to tell Diane that we are practicing here for a blooper reel.
Oh, good.
Don't turn the camera off, no matter
My
what.
favorite.
Right. Yeah, I don't know that we're practicing. We're actively in the middle of it.
We're making. I'm doing my best.
All right. So, is there a difference between an antagonist and a villain? For instance, is the barista who gave me whole milk versus almond milk a villain or a protagonist in her own story fighting the power by upsetting my stomach? So, let's just go. Whoever wants to jump in, feel free just to jump in.
All right. I would like to say this. Yes, there's a difference. And the other possibility about the barista is that she wasn't paying any attention. And she just made because it was early in the morning, and she made what she usually makes.
Right.
And she wasn't, the only evil she was doing was not paying attention. But yeah, there's a difference because an antagonist is somebody who your protagonist says, we're going to do this, and the antagonist says, no, we're going to do that. Not necessarily out of evil intent, but because your protagonist is not going the way your antagonist wants to. A villain is somebody who I don't even really like the term because everybody is the hero of their own story. And a villain is someone who knows that what they're doing is evil and kind of doesn't care. And that there's a borderline there between they're doing it for a reason that seems to them good, and they're doing it because they actually don't give a shit about anybody else. So, you're doing a bad thing to save somebody you're arguably not a villain. You're doing a bad thing, and everybody else gets screwed and you get rich, you are a villain. But those people are less interesting than the first crowd, the people who are doing bad things for good reasons. So yeah, I think there's definitely a difference. And an antagonist is a little more, they have a little more right to be there that I think.
Yeah, I'd rather write that barista as a protagonist. I feel like you could do a lot with that character as a protagonist, depending on depending on who the barista underserved or misserved, who views her as an incompetent, someone who should be fired. I want to see the manager. To do something with that barista's life could be interesting, or at least for that.
So you're saying I'm a monster? No, I'm sorry. I'm kidding. I'm a fiction writer. That never even happened. I'm sure maybe it has happened before, but I used it as a made-up example. Do you want to jump in there, Diana?
I do, because I found myself thinking, well, can the antagonist can the villain also be the protagonist? Because when you asked the question initially, I found myself thinking, are there villains in literary fiction, or are there villains in genre fiction, or are there villains at all? Because my villains always end up having some redeeming qualities. So my villains are also sometimes my protagonists.
Sure.
That's what I was. I'm sorry to jump in. What I was going to say is, that, a lot of things I write are very, very much explorations of the interior world of a character, and so I think that they can be antagonists or villains to themselves in certain ways, and in certain ways they can be the heroes of their own stories. So it all, to me, like a lot of it kind of takes place within one consciousness of a character, as opposed to a more traditional protagonist, antagonist, protagonist, villain, etc. So I think that's also a possibility to consider it. To consider one particular character, the interior world of one character, and how they can actually, in terms of like how they view themselves and how that can change the way in which they can see themselves as a villain or a hero within one story. So, it's a possibility.
Yeah, I like to think of everyone as both, right? You're an antagonist and a protagonist, right? Kind of, depending, right? So even in that scenario, and actually all of my baristas are very good to me. So all the local coffee shops I go to, thank you, Classic Coffee and Clatch, and all of you guys are always great to me. But in that scenario, right, it's like you can be both. Like I can be a protagonist, like it's my story, I'm going about doing this, but as I go about trying to carry out my goals, those can differ, those can conflict with someone else's, and then so you kind of end up being both. But I do wonder though, because then there is, funny, a lot of this is chiming over, Tim, from our conversation, but you had talked about like capital E evil, right? Like there is serial killers, right? But I think, I don't know that, Ted Bundy had a lot of redeeming qualities, although I heard he was charming, when he wasn't murdering, viciously. I think it's safe to say he was a villain, but but Dario, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, this is interesting. First of all, SJ has again got me thinking about the difference between villain and antagonist. I'm not sure I agree, but it's very interesting thought. It's so much to do with perspective, isn't it? And it is a truism that everyone is the protagonist in their own story. But there's also, a question of absolute morality and relative morality and ethics here. I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking of my antagonist in my novel Black Easter, which I know Bill and Diane have read, who was just thoroughly evil. I mean, he was a black magician of the most dangerous kind and had no regard at all for human life in the pursuit of his goals. But was he evil? I'm not sure. It so much depends on perspective, and maybe I've lost my moral compass here. I don't know. But I think this is a really complicated question. I do think, I'm not a religious person, but I do think that there are a few truly evil people. I think of them as people born without a soul. And any regard for any human life at all, and not not necessarily the higher ideals that inspire someone like my antagonist I'm talking about, who had some very high ideals, which he just felt transcended any minor moral considerations.
So let me ask a question about that. Is it interesting to have a villain who's pure evil? Or can you have a main character that's purely evil? Or do you need that purely evil character to be a bit player because there's so little depth there? I mean, you can creep your reader out completely with your character, and Black Easter was truly creepy. And but could that character have been a main character? I'm not sure. I think you would have had to give him a different set of characteristics or more or something, so that there was something more interesting than that he was a naked psychopath. Just a question.
And at what point do they become stereotyped if you're trying to make someone purely evil?
Yeah. Sort of about like Hannibal Lecter, right? Who has brought up a serial killer, so we'll use a fictional one, right? As in books and film. Where would you guys put him on that? You know, because I think we're all in agreement. I think there's a difference between kind of a straight villain and then, you know, just the antagonist, right? Antagonist can be someone in that bell curve where most of us are, right? Like you have some good things, bad things. You mostly try to do good or not, but you're a normal human. But you start hitting those edges where you have saints and you have, you know, serial killers, however you want to place it. Where would we put Hannibal Lecter? Like, how does a character like that kind of fall into the discussion?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Jesse. Yeah, I guess it depends whether you can understand them to any degree or identify with them. Hannibal Lecter, I almost can. A Freddy Krueger type, I can't. He's stereotypical. That's a stereotypical villain.
Yeah, the horror villain. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I guess that makes a lot. I mean, you start talking villains, a lot of like Jason, even though Jason was drowned in Crystal Lake, right? But when you watch him, he's just a guy in a hot, hacky, mask, hacking people. Like, there's not great death there. Like you said, he's there to terrorize. But Hannibal Lecter is also brilliant and everything, so it does make it more complicated. Go ahead, Jesse. Sorry.
Yeah, so he has a lot of charming qualities, and that like tension is what makes him so creepy. It's like, oh, this is a really smart guy. Like, this is a really well put together guy. This guy knows fine cuisine. Like, all these qualities that we would, normally ascribe to like a very quote unquote respectable or cultured member of society. But at the same time, he's a ruthless, cold-blooded, calculating killer, right? So I think that's a perfect example of this just sort of crazy mixture of traits. And that's what I think gives him depth. And so but also maybe he is purely evil, but like to me, when I watch him or when I read him, it's like I'm not going back and forth, but I'll move over to the left a little bit and be like, oh, I'm actually like, he said something that's really funny, but wait a minute, I should laugh at that because he's a really, he's a really cruel individual. So I think that's a great example of villain being kind of a relative term.
Yeah, I think if you look at the degrees of capacity for cruelty, there's a lot of cruelty out there. Like people who are in the produce aisle with you right now, that person may have a great capacity for cruelty, maybe doesn't act on it, maybe likes to see other people do bad things to other people. I'd say there's a touch of evil in that. The bystander who relishes the suffering of others, even if it's not at their own hand. And then there are the characters who not only have that capacity for cruelty, but may also have an appetite for sadism, for inflicting suffering. A lot of those people out there too. Some of them are caught as serial killers. Some of them are fighting in wars, committing horrible atrocities. Some are running countries like Russia. Vladimir Putin he's cruel, and he is a sadist. So I would use a capital E evil for him, for Pol Pot. You could go on down the list. What kind of person ascended to this level of power over others and who has every intention of using it for suffering? That's where I was going the other day with you on capital E evil. That my belief that there is evil, capital E, in humanity.
So that's the enjoyment of actually inflicting it. Yeah.
That is.
Yeah, the sadism. That's great. That's a good definition.
But now Hannibal Lecter, as I recall, that was not him. He was a serial killer, but he was not a torturer.
No, correct. That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
And he also, the interesting thing to me is that when he started in Silence of the Lambs, when he started with Claire, he was playing a game. He wanted to see if it would work. You know, he would offer this, she would have to offer that. Just, you know, he didn't know what the outcome would be. He knew what he wanted. And that game playing really threw me off in terms of absolute evil, because that to me is a creative and interesting act, as cruel as it was to her. That wasn't the point of what he was doing. He's a great character. That was a brilliant expression of
Well, the other type of evil that I like to see explored is when good writers and good artists explore it within our duality. You ever seen the movie A Simple Plan with Bill Paxton? But you've seen SJ, you've seen that. Bill Paxton, Billy Bob Thornton, and that to me was a really good example of a man who, by every appearance, was good, and I believe was good. He and his wife are expecting a baby. His young wife, they're expecting a baby. He has a modest but solid job at a feed store, selling products to farmers, and happy life. And then he and his brother and friend stumble across a crashed plane in the middle of the winter in the woods, and it is loaded with cash. Now, there's some predictable qualities in a story like that. That's not the first time that the temptation of money has corrupted a character. But that character was so well drawn through Bill Paxton that he's the last character who is pretty well drawn so far that you would expect to tap into the other side of our duality in a real and realistic way, gradually. I thought that was a film story told well, that introduces the small e evil that we may all have the potential for under certain circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm interested in. Again, getting back to like the interior, just the possibilities that we are many things in many different moments. And I would personally like to explore villainy in the space of one character's personality or consciousness.
Right. Well, there's that, and there's a saying that I can't remember, but it's basically you have the greatest capacity for harm when you think what you're doing is right. Right? It's like, you know, like
Right.
Hitler is a monster. We could say he's capital E evil. He thought what he was doing was right and convinced people around him that monstrosity, that horror was correct. And you know, I mean, you could have a Hitler character, but also like on a smaller scale, right? You can see that, like, how can that happen with me, right? Like, where you can kind of connect it, like, okay, when can I be thinking like reciprocity, right? There's the vigilantism aspect of it, but it's like, when do you, oh, I've had enough of this and I'm going to do this thing for good. When does that go from being strictly good to potentially being really evil? Like, you know,
Right. Yeah. What do you do if you're doing something that you believe is really good? Say that the justice system hasn't been able to achieve.
yeah.
And you do something, and that's satisfying. It also may be satisfying to your audience if this is fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens if something goes wrong? You know, how many of us have seen Dexter, for example? I mean, he was a natural serial killer, retrained by his stepfather to at least channel his desire to kill, to killing bad guys that have been let go by the justice system. And as a blood splatter analyst, he's in a position to kind of know who's guilty. But what happens when what happens, and it happens in season 1, so there's no spoilers here, when there is the first collateral damage involving an innocent person. And that's when Jesse, you mentioned wanting to explore this type of small e evil. The really compelling thing about Dexter and really seeing things from his point of view, including the voiceover, is how does he react when he is forced to do something to somebody who's not a villain?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a real word that I think, I mean, you can't deny like the outward acts are cruel and are evil, but I don't know. I think it's very interesting to accept. I love exploring I would love to explore the context of someone considered purely evil, right? And get into the trauma and the history and the circumstances.
Right.
To, again, not, to, how do I put this? Like, to get away from putting the label on it, right? Even though I do believe, like, I'll say, like, some people are pure evil, but even those people, I would be curious, like, how deep can I dig into their histories, into their pasts, into what they've experienced to show how complicated it potentially is.
But then aren't you getting into that nuance that can in some ways undercut moral condemnation? If you understand, and I'm certainly not defending Ted Bundy, but if you understand, or at least presented with the reason the character may be unhinged, it makes it much more interesting for the reader. But does that also undermine their status as a villain, a pure villain?
Possibly. And I think that's interesting. And that's an interesting line to toe.
And that's where I wonder whether you lapse into literary fiction so that the point is to explore that kind of character, or if that happens in any genre, even if it's a relatively fleeting character, but certainly if it's the main character, do you have to do that no matter what to create an interesting character, even if you only hint at the flip side of that pure evil, which may or may not explain why that character is so evil.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they've even now returned to the 2.5 decade story of the Menendez brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Murdered their mom and dad in cold blood, but they were apparently abused their entire lives by the father, and in some ways by the mother in complicity, with the father, and trying to determine what about their final solution was understandable. I have trouble doing that. But at the same time, I also didn't experience abuse at the hands of my parents and make a decision at the age of 22 or whatever they were to do something about it. Those stories are fascinating. No, and apparently they're looking into it again with them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. I wonder that because it's a fascinating discussion. Getting back to the writing craft kind of part of it, or the storytelling kind of craft, I guess, if you did put it a little more broadly. So, how would you go? So the second question, I talked a little bit more about villains. I'm a little more interested in just talking like we could say villains, but antagonists. Understanding there's a difference here, but how do you go about? Let's stick with the evil, theme we have running here. But how do you go about kind of writing a character, exploring evil from, to me, I always think genre, that's just where you're putting things on a bookshelf or on a category in Amazon. But so wherever you want to take it, each individual here. But how do you go about writing a character that might have, how do you go about exploring evil through your story?
From a pure craft point of view, I would just write the character or start writing scenes with the character with all my judgments and preconceived notions, and then revise and revise and revise. The revision process would be a distillation process. And that's why, one of the reasons I love writing so much is because my first draft is always just like, oh, wow, so this is what you think. Okay, let's go back. It takes on new layers, new depth. So yeah, I would start with just like whatever I would, normally like gut reaction think. And then go back and look at it and then start thinking about these things we're talking about. Like, well, is that just you, saying that? Or like, would this, really apply? And it's, all the questions that you start to ask.
And I would start with specificity. I would start trying to separate my character from its trope, like serial killer, burglar, domestic violence perpetrator, that kind of thing. I think I would right away start picking away at the general for the sake of the more specific, so that you end up with a character that's beholden to its own history and its own life events, more than let's make Ted Bundy a Ted Bundy-like generic psychopath. I think most really well-drawn characters are in the specific details, in the very granular nature of who they are and what they've been through, which defines, even if they do end up being quite evil, again, it gives you a certain amount of depth and appreciation for why they might have ended up that way, not in an apologetic sense. You don't necessarily need to like or forgive the character, but it's certainly that the more specificity, the more you can develop a fairly well-rounded character, to the extent that the author wants a well-rounded character. Again, it depends on the role they play in the story, but that's how I would look at it anyway.
I think you nailed it in terms of subverting the trope from the beginning. I think you have to treat them like any other character. But they come to different conclusions based on their experience and information than another character in your story would.
Yeah, part of that decision has to do with point of view. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be valuable to deliver the point of view of that villain, reader, in a third-person anonymous narration, with multiple characters' points of view? My novel Reciprocity, Fingo, the arch villain in Reciprocity, among other villains. I decided before the reader ever meets Fingo that other villains are going to be afraid of him. I wanted to be afraid of him. I wanted the reader to be afraid of him before ever meeting him. And then I wanted, once I meet him in person as the author, and it was like that, the guy I'm thinking of, I'm not sure I really want to be in a room with him, and I am creating this guy, So what I decided to do with him, knowing he's coming into the story, but for those who haven't read it, there is a cabal in the United States that is killing mafia dons, mob bosses, one city at a time. The boss in that city of the American Sicilian mafia, and two entities cannot have that. The FBI can't have that, so they set up a national task force to track these guys down. And the mafia can't have it, but they don't want them to come to trial. They want them to be 20 feet underground or at the bottom of the ocean, one or the other, and anonymously so. They decide to bring over a Sicilian hitman who had been a nightmare for magistrates and prosecutors and police in Sicily for decades, to do this for them. And I decided that the conversation among the Mafia Commission, in which they decide to bring this guy over, is when I wanted myself and the reader to start to be afraid of him. So the Mafia, the commission head named Santo Porchetta says, I've decided that we're going to bring Fingo over. And I decided I'll have silence in the room. And then one of them from New York City says, is it true what they say about the 38 days? Oh, yes, with that magistrate. Yes, it is. And there's, again, silence. These guys, mob bosses, are afraid of this legend that they've never met. Because I really needed to be afraid of him myself in order to write him. And then once I brought him in, it was mainly through the things that he said to people that made me more scared of him, because he didn't just get into physical intimidation and sadism, but also psychological. He would use spoken word to intimidate, and he intimidated me. And it made me write him better that way. And I've written other villains who are not like him at all. He's as close to cartoonish of any villain I've created. But yeah, just because he has a sadistic nature that is, I think I'd rather burn in a house fire than be under the control of a person like this. Just to be completely under the control of a person like this. And so I decided to write him. I've written 2 more novels that my agent has. There are villains in those novels, but they're not like him. I don't want to copy him. I don't want to do another villain anytime soon who's entirely evil, but he is. And others are more nuanced.
I love how you consult your personal reactions or use them as a guide to creating the characters. I'm gonna steal that.
I was just thinking of it like they say, like method actors, right? It's like, oh, you tap into your emotions. I'm a method host. That's why I'm just drinking all the time.
I think some useful tools are the qualities we most dislike in other people, like smugness and pride and arrogance. That's what I gave Alex Jones in Black Easter. And that, coupled with high intelligence, and the ability to run rings around people and justify your actions. Smugness and arrogance are just despicable. So if you have someone who's saturated with those qualities and hell-bent on his own agenda at any cost, I think that helps a lot. Hey, this is a very interesting topic.
It really is.
None of the people, I don't think I've ever created anyone who was pure evil. What to me, it's important to get inside each character's head, even if I'm narrating in the first person and there's only one point of view. I need to know why these people are doing what they did. It's not enough to just, well, I killed her because we'd been having an affair and I was afraid she was going to tell my wife. Okay, what would have happened if she told his wife? Right. How would that have affected him? Why is it? I'm always fascinated by that moment where a normal person, like,
yes,
decides that he's in a hole so deep that the reasonable way out of it is to kill somebody.
Yes.
Wait, that's not reasonable. That's not a good idea. Mm-hmm. But at the moment, it seems like it. And that's what really interests me is who are you? That when you got to that point, that was, that, and it wasn't just, oh, shit, I want to kill him. And then it's all right. And I'm going to go out and kill him. And that to me is a really fascinating
Yes.
So it's making and justifying a choice that your reader would not have made in their shoes.
Yeah, that we hope the reader wouldn't have made. But if
Right.
I would like the reader to know why this person made it.
If you can get the reader to say, it's not impossible that I could be in this situation sometime.
Right. And if I'm there, is that what I would do? I mean, I can see how into the corner that guy was backed. There was,
Yes.
there's always something else you could do besides kill somebody. But,
Yeah.
but he felt it wasn't. And I want the reader to feel.
Well, so you having seen, SJ having seen a simple plan, I think you are brilliantly getting at the moment that Bill Paxton character becomes a killer. And it's when it's when he murders the old man on the snowmobile, who has been hit by his brother and knocked out, and they thought might be dead, and then he's not dead, and he starts to mumble and talk. When he kneels over him, shuts off his air, murders him in front of his brother, and then engineers the accident.
And you know that it kind of flashed through his mind what would happen if he didn't do that. And that was bad enough that he decided to do it. But he wasn't, until he did it, he wasn't that guy.
That's
was-
right. He became that guy under the
And
pressure of that moment. The police could discover this any moment. This guy is going to say that my brother assaulted him. Then it's going to lead to them, finding the money that we've hidden away, and it's all going to unravel, and we're going to go to prison, and my child is going to spend 6 years without a dad. That kind of is what he was thinking then. And then he does it.
And this guy is old anyway, and look, he's not well, and
He's an asshole.
and he's an asshole.
Right.
The world's not going to miss him. I'm just gonna
I bet all that's him later, though. I bet he did it, and then he thought, I can't believe it. I killed a guy well, but he was an old guy, and he wasn't well, and he was an asshole, and and my
That's just
kid,
like justifying it.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's that emotional logic, right? Go
Well,
ahead,
then,
Dan.
then when he tells his wife, lets her in on it, and she makes the transition. She at first is like, "Oh, that's horrible," and then she's like, "Okay, here's what we got to do next." And she becomes sort of a head coach. She's like, "All right, here's how you and therefore we are going to get away with it, because you know what? I don't like my job at the library as much as I thought, and I like the idea of all that money. And the only way we get to enjoy that is if we
But
cover the murder."
But you did it already anyway, so it's not
Right.
like
I'm thinking Double Indemnity and Fargo right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
But a good literary example too is Bonfire of the Vanities, Norman Mailer, right? Who
No, it's
the
Tom
character was,
Wolfe.
excuse me?
I think it's Tom Wolfe.
Tom
Oh,
Wolfe. Yes, you're right. Thank you. Where the character is just under an escalating downward spiral of increasingly few options and worse options and hysteria. And the whole book is basically a breakdown in tiny steps, each one of which seems fairly reasonable and defensible. And it gets just until the end of it is totally indefensible. But it's a good example of how you write a story that just escalates out of all control, starting with the character who's really quite ordinary.
We're certainly seeing why so many artists visit all the gradations in good and evil. Yeah, why it's so worth visiting, even though so many have visited that whole spectrum before us. It's fresh. It's still, as long as you bring your own freshness to it. It is a tremendous well of opportunity for writing, and
Sure.
not to be trite, but of examining the human condition.
Yeah. Well, it's everything we've said goes to almost every true crime podcast, or show out there, right? I mean, I think I heard the thing that there's like 5 million podcasts and 25% are true crime because the exploring, and I think that's the stuff. Because me and the lovely Claire were talking one night, because you're watching them and you're like, how did this person get there? Like, why did that happen? And it's, the answer is one step at a time, right?
Yeah.
The same way we get anywhere. It's that you were talking about Tom Wolfe, just that you took these steps and you get to this place, and it makes no logical sense, but it's that emotional logic. And when you can display that, that's what gets really interesting. It's like when people break up, and it kind of doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But when you're there and you're in it, you get it. It made sense in its weird, emotional, logical way.
Well, Anne Rule was a master, though not fiction, but her crime analyses, her true crime books do exactly that. They follow step by step how the human condition breaks down. I mean, some of these people.
Who was that, Diane? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Anne Rule, R-U-L-E.
Okay.
Rule.
Yeah,
And
my
she
wife
was-
and I just a couple
home.
nights ago, with my wife and I just a couple nights ago watched a new Netflix movie called Woman of the Hour.
Oh, we just saw that. I just saw that 2 nights ago.
Okay, there we go again. Now that's true crime. You know, this serial killer was on the dating game in the late 70s.
Right.
That's what you just saw, Jesse, right?
Yeah, yeah. But he was pretty much.
Oh, I've heard of that. I know who you're talking about. I didn't watch that show.
He's
but I've heard of
he's
that.
not in the category we're talking about from A Simple Plan and that type of thing. He's the real McCoy evil.
Right. Right.
I mean, and, you know, and he started about 10 years before this dating game episode. He'd been doing it for years, and here he is on the dating game, and he is the one chosen by the Bachelorette for the date.
It's really creepy.
It is very creepy, very well acted.
People love that
I've
actor.
heard of that.
So after that, my daughter said, I'm gonna check YouTube. So we stayed right where we were. She got YouTube up on the living room screen, and we found that episode in the vault. And
Really?
we watched
Whoa.
the episode. It's there.
I don't think I can watch it.
Whole episode. We watched that episode. I watched the dating game when I was a kid, you know, and Jim Lang. I remember when Michael Jackson, as a teenager, late teenager, was on there as the chooser, not as one of the bachelors, but as choosing a woman for a date. But it was, I mean, the guy. I'll tell you this, Jesse. The guy who portrayed Rodney, was it Rodney Alcala? I think.
Yeah. Daniel Zapata. I love this actor.
That guy did a hell of a job portraying the real McCoy. And
He's
real McCoy was better looking. I mean, he was pretty handsome, actually.
Yeah.
He had the long hair. They did everything right, and the personality was dead on. Except that the real guy, you could see how he, like Ted Bundy, could prey on women, and not just vulnerable women, but just women. I mean, he on there. He is on TV, smiling the entire episode. He smiled, like he's just loving being there, and he just seems just such an pleasant guy. His answers were good. He was very practiced at fooling people.
Yeah.
I love the nuance in the movie where you could tell when he was sliding into the darkness on his face.
Mhm.
That's credit to the actor.
Fortunately for the Anna Kendrick character, she recognized it for what it was.
Yeah.
That was good. Yeah.
Getting back to like we were talking about Hannibal Lecter, is like, so he had a lot of charming qualities, and I would find myself like, you know, when he was flirting with women, when he was on the show, and like I'd find myself kind of like getting into it, and then I'd have to pull back and be like, wait, this guy's a serial killer, right? So again, I think it's, you know, when you can humanize people like this, that it really starts to get interesting.
No.
Villainy
Well,
starts to
also,
flip.
because you turn a character, or what you thought as the reader was a character, you turn it on its head, and you suddenly have to square within that character two seemingly opposing sets of qualities: charm,
Right.
sincerity, or apparent empathy, with absolute amorality,
Mhm.
and that's the trick.
Humor too.
Yeah.
You guys know the
Yeah.
story of how Anne Rule got started writing these books? Because she was on a
Hotline.
rape hotline, and night overnight, and the killer beside me, that was her first book. The guy working with her was Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
What?
Oh, wow.
He would take calls, and he would tell people what to do, where to go. He was empathetic. He was, and everybody loved him. He was good looking. Everybody else who worked there loved him. But she worked at night, and she lived alone, so she brought her dog. Bundy would walk her to her car, make sure she, got in the car, Everybody loved him, but the dog hated him.
Worse.
Lovely.
As a dog lover, I know the dogs know.
Dog could tell his eyes weren't the same as his voice. His body
Yeah.
posture wasn't perfect.
Yeah.
The dog made the dog upset because he was given a really good act, but it wasn't perfect. And
Yes.
the dog hated him. And
Yeah.
when he found out that it was
Isn't that
him,
cool? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a pretty compelling read if you're curious.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really
Wow.
Yeah, I'll believe it. That's not so. How do you keep? Because Tim, you had mentioned earlier, like Fingo was the closest you get to like a cartoonish villain. And there's certainly times like when there's two things. One, that when we're watching TV or something, that I joke to my wife about, is sometimes something happens and it makes no sense, except for the fact that they wanted that to happen. Like, so she'll be like, "Why did that happen?" I'm like, "Because plot has to happen, that's why that happens, and it kind of breaks the spell a little bit. The other one is like cartoonish villains, like sometimes when like they're just like so almighty and stuff, where you're just like, okay, like something like you'll see in the worst examples, which I'll use, it would be like there's an easy horror one. It's when Jason's walking behind you and the person's running, and somehow they catch up still, like just walking. You're like, oh, how the plot happens. He's pure evil and he gets to go.
It helps when she trips over a root.
Those damn inconvenient roots. Well, they speed walked away instead. They would still get away and then step over their roots.
Really.
How do you manage that? How do you keep? So Tim, you can give us the example if you like the Singo, but how do you manage kind of keeping a character from getting into that cartoonish?
Well, I would say he was so evil, and he filled me with dread. The way that I made him as human as I could was humor. He was a very clever conversationalist. He was capable of subtle sarcasm that was intimidating. A character that he has gained some control over corrects him when he says Luciano, but an Italian native speaker did say for Lucky, said Lucky, and he said that. His English was excellent, but it was still second language. And the character, who did not know how much trouble they were in, they were in trouble, didn't know how much, said, that, I think you mean Lucky. And Fingo thanks him for correcting his English, and then leans into his right ear and says, and whispers, "If you're finished with my linguistic shortcomings, we can continue." And it chilled me when I had him say that into the guy's ear, just whispered into his ear, and the conversation turned from that point forward. I had to make him. If I just settled on him being pure evil, it was going to fail. And I received more messages from people who had read the novel about him than any other individual character in the novel, including characters I like a lot, who are the ones who are actually doing what's happening in the novel, the opponents of people like Fingo. And I think at the end of the day, it was not because of just the pure evil, but that he, sort of like Hannibal Lecter, I guess I hadn't thought about that, was capable of very human interaction. In his case, it was humor. In Lecter's, it's highly intellectual. We may share an interest in music. We could talk for hours. You could have talked for hours with Hannibal Lecter about classical music or literature, and he's still going to kill you at the end of the evening,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I don't see writers, well, maybe I'm just very picky about what I read, but I just don't see an awful lot of writers doing that fatal stereotyping thing. I see it all the time in TV and movies, which is why I'm there to watch so few of them. I think Hollywood is just so bad at this. because they let everybody have their 2 cents, and the worst stereotypes get built as a result. But I don't see it a lot in literature.
What's interesting is that when I was a kid and was reading comic books, there was always that guy. All he wanted was to world, kill Superman, whatever. Comic books have now gone over to the angstiest villains you can imagine, and they all have
Yeah.
all have histories, and they all were badly used in the past. And TV and movies have gone into Jason and Freddy Krueger, and it's interesting to watch kids growing up reading comic books today. They don't have that, because Superman, of course, had no shortcomings. He had kryptonite, but that wasn't that wasn't his fault. That wasn't his emotional issue. Had no issues.
It began with the Silver Surfer comics in the late 60s.
Yes.
That was
Yes.
the first one, first complex character.
Yes. And now they've all evolved into that. I have to say, I want to go back many screens ago to when Diane said lapsing into literary fiction. I love that phrase. That we genre writers occasionally just lapse into literary.
I think the literary fiction is the bucket of misfit toys. It's the category that nothing else fits. It's what the hell? It must be literary. So, and since I'm a literary fiction writer, I don't feel too bad writing myself as a misfit more and more in the marketplace. I think that's true, if nowhere else.
Yeah.
I think a good book is a good book, whether it's literary fiction, crime, mystery. I mean,
Bingo.
book is a good book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Edgar Allan Poe said that the great story has a singular effect on the reader.
Yeah.
It has a singular, lasting effect on the reader. I argue that's literary.
Yeah.
It's not. If it doesn't, it's not, in my opinion.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I get what you mean, because there's I tend to think of it because you can go different routes, right? But you can be a very artistic writer, and they're not mutually exclusive, right? But you can be a very artistic writer. You can be maybe more commercial focused, or you can be kind of just I need to get things out there. You're pumping out content kind of thing. But they're not mutually exclusive, but they do sometimes have different goals going in, right? Like a goal can just be you want to sell 1 million copies, and that's fine. I mean, there's no, it's not we're not hunters and gatherers. You got to make a paycheck somehow. So like, cool, you want to sell 1 million copies? This is professional gig. You want to do it. You can try to overlap those with, I really just want to do the next great artistic expression, that's out there. And this is going to be a very personal thing or artistic for me. And I'm going to go do it. And there could be some interlapping of those two, but I think of genres, anytime I mention them, but literally I just think, look, we're just talking where I'm putting that on the bookshelf. It's not, how good is it? How bad? I think you can go to the science fiction. You can go to any genre and find a book that is just as great as anything you would in that literary fiction. I agree.
It's not a pejorative. And I found myself in the process of trying to find a new agent, and was in developing a query for the last book I wrote. Thought, is there such a category as literary westerns? Because I think that's what I wrote, but I don't know what to call it. So I think that there's a lot of bleed through there. It's as I say, genre to me is not a pejorative, and it's not, the lines are not very clear.
Especially now,
writers have there's some benefit to conventions that literary fiction is totally without. So we stumble around in the dark, hoping we hit something useful. And it's the beginning of a book. So I just think one has some tools that the other one is entirely lacking in, but that's just me.
I say write a cracking good story.
Right.
In the end, that's what it all comes down to.
Right.
That's. Did you want to say something, Chick?
Yeah, Lonesome Dove.
Yeah.
Ah,
Literally.
Yep, that's exactly what I put in my query letter. In fact, it was the only thing I could think of that was comparable.
Half of what see now I got Dario's disease.
Larry McMurtry.
Half of what Elmer Leonard wrote were westerns.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, for God's sake, he wrote the 310 to Yuma. I mean, you know,
Right.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah,
You could argue the same for No Country for Old Men.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not set in the 1890s. Contemporary Western.
The Western.
Mhm.
It's super literary, I guess, if you want to call anything literary. But yeah.
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 So yeah, there's probably, you know, there are probably 2 or 3 great examples of any combination genre you wanna make. So I
Yeah.
think
You look at a film like Unforgiven. It's a Western.
Mhm.
And it's incredibly excellent, entertaining, suspenseful, and it is literary. It is all of these things.
Clickety clack, clickety clack, clickety clack. Ding. Oh, hello. You caught me right as I was putting the finishing touches on my epic absurdist satire, Pirates of Appalachia. And now it is time for the long road to publication and the long editing process. You know, as writers, we spend tons of time editing our work. The hardest part, I think, of the editing process is really like the proofreading, the copy editing, because you were so immersed in it. I've just spent 13 years immersed in Pirates, got it all together, went through, edited it front and back, by characters, all these different asymmetrical ways, and still it's going to have typos in it. And they're going to horrify me one day if I ever find those in the actual printed edition. The way I combat that is with Edit GPT. You found today's sponsor. The link is on the screen now. I'm going to put it here. Here's the link. If you're on the podcast forum and you can't see me pointing up at that link, if you're on a podcast, you're really missing out. I'm really animated with my hands. But if you can't find it on there, feel free. You'll find it in the description. It helps support the show. It helps restock the bar. Helps keep this guy happy so that we can keep putting all these shows out there for all of you. Thanks for everything. Let's get back to the writing, because Pirates of Appalachia is not going to finish itself. The one thing Edit GPT cannot do is save the file for you. So I'm going to make sure to save that now. So I want to get back to my work. You get back to your regularly scheduled programming. Awesome. So getting back to character here. So I did want to. So this isn't strictly villains antagonists talk, but I think it was one of these open bar, one of these shows. The topic had come up about writing characters smarter than you. And there's a really funny quote. I wish I could give it to the person, but they always just go like, if their character does something really dumb, they go, oh, because the character can only be as smart as the writer writing them, you know. And it's funny, but I don't think accurate. I think you can certainly write characters that are smarter than you. You don't have to be a genius to write a genius in a compelling way. But it can be difficult. So I wanted to bring the topic up here is, how do you go about writing a character that, you know, might be smarter than you, even just smarter than you in a different field, right? Like we have our certain, you know, niches of what we're good at or not, what our aptitudes are. But anyone want to jump in on that?
yeah. You know, oddly enough, I've thought about this a lot. As you know, I wrote science fiction for years and read nothing but for a long time and was very involved with the science fiction community. So this comes up. The best example, I think there's a lot of kind of sleight of hand and misdirection involved. You have to use some unusual techniques. Because you can't write smarter than you are. You actually can't. I don't think you can. You have to fake it somehow and give that impression. The best example I've ever seen of it is in a volume of Ted Chiang. Now, Ted Chiang wrote Stories of Your Life, which became Avatar, the movie. And he's a superb, very clever science fiction writer, verging on the literary. He's not not stereotypical genre. He's very versatile. And there's a story in that called Understand, which is essentially, it comes down to a direct confrontation between two super intelligent people, way beyond anything we can imagine. And the way he does a lot of it is they go beyond language in their interaction. They use sort of gesture behavior combinations that to one another convey a great deal more than, a simple word exchange, verbal exchange. Very clever. A few others have done it in writing about AI. And I'm not sure I really understand how it's done well enough to describe it, but there's definitely sleight of hand involved. It's not like ordinary writing.
It's very interesting.
I hate to do this because now I sound like Tim's character, but Dario, not Avatar, Arrival.
Arrival. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
But that's really interesting because that story, if I'm remembering the right story, it's the two mathematicians, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the aliens.
Yeah. No. The Understand.
Oh yes, you're right. Yes. Thank you. You've read it.
The thing about that story is that one of them was having a crisis, but it was a crisis of belief and emotion, not a crisis of intelligence. They were both, as you say, way more intelligent and probably than Chang is. But what the story was about was something we could understand, and he could.
Yes, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the technique of doing it, I was very impressed because I am the farthest thing from a mathematician, and that story really worked for me because I got how it was a crisis, then why it was a crisis.
Yeah.
And the crisis. I have actually never. It's interesting, Dario, that you say this comes up in science fiction. That it's part of that world. This issue of how to write really, geniuses. And that's what good old Hannibal Lecter also was.
Mm-hmm.
And he was written as someone with such a deep reserve of intelligence.
And I would posit that part of the way you create that in a character, a sense of genius, is to play on the other side of that typical character where they're either socially inept or they're unable in some way to respond or react appropriately to the normal world because they're elevated to a level where they're just not living as we live among the mundane and cracked sidewalks and heavy grocery bags and that kind of thing. So I think some of the creating of the intelligence, of the brilliance trope anyway, is that there are other areas in which they're terribly lacking. So you've got contrast. The other thing is just suggestibility. You don't have to have dialogue that's brilliant to suggest that these people are brilliant. Again, in the way they react to other characters who might not be brilliant or react to the character who's equally brilliant. But, you have to kind of spin that character and show the deficit as well as the assets.
Yeah.
And that may help, too, to play up the unusual intellectual ability.
Even Sherlock Holmes, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
who was definitely deficient in some areas, but super intelligent in others. Yeah.
Right. Well, I also think you have the benefit of Matthew Kaye. Tim had said this on the show one of the times was you get, as the writer, you get to time travel. So we're all like, right? It's like, if I could go back in time and invest in Apple, right? Well, that character can, because that how the story goes. And they could be thinking 2 steps ahead because you've already written it, right? Or you plotted it out or whatever it might be. They also know because they can head jump, because you're the writer and you know what that other character is thinking and what they're doing. So you have to show that in some way that's believable and not, because plot happens, right? But or because they're so much better, but you can, right, that they pick up on a little nuance that maybe we wouldn't or not. But
Yeah, you can make up what they're smart about, and you can look things up.
But the
Exactly.
other thing-
Because they have the Google box ready to
Come out of their mouths, the character who can just quote Shakespeare at the tip of a hat.
right.
More than a few instances, but I sure know how to look things up.
part of the
My character can then say,
part of the magic of fiction is I have an elephant keeper in one of my books, and I am typically met with applause about how much research I did about elephants and elephant keeping and zoo life and so on. And the fact is, I spent exactly 8 hours. That's it. An elephant keeper, 8 hours total. And yet, I would posit that if I can come across as knowing a lot, my reader's going to assume I know even more. So if I can credibly create myself as knowledgeable, that's all I really need to do is convince them that I know a great deal more than I actually do.
Right. It's almost an iceberg.
As writing, as writers, isn't it? It's a superpower.
And the things that you do know, the 8 things you learned about elephant keeping, you can dot through the book in such a way that your reader thinks, well, if the question had been something else, she would have been able to answer.
Exactly.
Whereas if it had been something else, you would have been.
Exactly. But I'm in control. So
Sure.
I wrote a book called, what the hell was that book called? On the Line, where someone's been kidnapped and a loony person is the kidnapper and is leaving clues. And the clues are in little plastic bags and they're things and you have to decipher them and then you get to the next place. And somebody said, oh my God, those clues were fabulous. How did you do that? And I'm thinking, because I knew where the next place was. I said, what would lead to that? Well, a chocolate bar and, this was not, I didn't actually do it.
Right.
But
Yeah,
I guess
it is on those things. Yeah, it happens a lot with detective stuff, right? And then how do you, so it's like, oh, how do they figure out all the clues for this? And part of it is like, yeah, you know who the killer is, so you know how to lead them to it.
In the book I'm writing now, I don't know who the killer is. So if anybody, has an idea, could you please just let me know?
It's the butler.
That in itself is a great topic.
Yes,
Finishing your story to find out what happens.
I am. I am.
I mean, that's what I do too. I find that I write, especially in novels versus short stories, I create a situation, that's certainly ripe for tension and conflict, and build the situation as the plot goes along. But then I prefer not to know how it's going to end. Reciprocity, I've told you before, Bill, I didn't know how it was going to end until it was getting close to the end. And yet that in itself is a very worthwhile topic for another show. There's so many approaches to that. Because when you talk about that, then you're also talking about outlining versus not outlining, for example.
Yeah.
There are great writers I know who meticulously out, and whatever makes your work come out better.
Right, sure. Well, and it's funny because there's so many variations to it too, right? Like when I wrote Pirates, I wrote it with no outline. I figured out characters and I had some ideas, but I figured out characters, a lot of it as I went. But then it was so much going on. The Pirates of Appalachia, the bootleggers, how they become that, what's happening in Pittsburgh post Trumpocalypse, that's down there. And afterwards, I was like, oh, I need an outline so I can make sure people aren't teleporting, people aren't, the things kind of make sense. So, and then I was like, okay, now I need to figure out the structure. And I was like, okay, I'm missing a little bit here or there and can kind of sculpt and add meat to it and stuff. But it is. I'll put that on the hopper. Thanks for bringing that up, Tim. I always like anyone that ever has ideas, please let me know, because I have a little hopper. I just add them, and usually I send the invite out. I just go, okay, here's 3 of these ones that were.
I actually really like this idea of method writing. I thought it was kind of a joke at first, but I mean, I think that can be an interesting thing to explore. Like, how involved are you in the creative process? Like, how much do you bring of yourself into the creative process while you're creating? Are you
Sure.
conscious of how you're creating as you're creating? I don't know. I think that's an interesting.
And I
area.
was just thinking, that's kind of a jump backwards in a way, but about how hostage we can be if we do know a lot about our subject. I'm thinking again about my winging it as an elephant keeper. It actually was very liberating. The follow-up book that I wrote, my last one that was published, was about a killer whale, and I had a lot of real life experience with that. And I think it was a less good book because of it, because I knew, and in part was relying on a real situation to get me through, speaking of plotting. And it was much less interesting, I think. I mean, I had too much detail. I knew too much that wasn't useful in the end. And I was really better off with elephants. So knowledge is good, but not all the time.
You're better off with the land whales than the sea whales. Oh, awesome. Well, thanks for that. So, and thanks everyone. That was all the questions I had. Is there any parting thoughts anyone would like to add?
No, that was a great panel. Terrific.
Really, really great panel. Yes.
Yeah, it's very inspiring to hear other writers. I mean, I feel like writing is it can be such an isolating process. And then you get around other writers, like accomplished writers, experienced writers, and you're like, oh yeah, amazing. I forgot. This is so inspiring. Like, so
But actually sitting around with you all in an actual bar,
yeah, I know. But then you get that happen.
Well, that's why we started taking the show live. I'm like, we're gonna start doing this live and in person. So all you bars out there, hit me up. We will make it happen.
So this has been really enjoyable. I love gaining from these conversations myself as a writer. I mean, it's been a long time since I taught creative writing. I taught it in college preparatory schools, and I would, without hesitation, show my students this whole conversation.
So thank you for that. Yeah.
I would definitely do that if it's fiction writing.
Right.
I would show this. I would just air this whole conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
Writers need writers. Nobody else gets it. I always say
Exactly.
writers need writers.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everybody. We'll close the show. And SJ, we made it for your class because I know you're teaching this in 7 minutes.
I was gonna ask.
recording, Bill, and I'll just play it for them.
What are you teaching?
I'm not teaching. You're not doing exercises today. You're just gonna listen.
SJ, what do you teach? Where do you teach?
No, it's an online class. Actually, this is a group of writers who've been with me for a couple of years.
Cool.
They've all finished novels. They're starting new novels. Many of them have been published in short story very well. One of them has been in 2 best of.
Great.
Wow.
That's
Very cool.
Really good. And in fact, they've been together so long that I told them not long ago that they don't need me anymore. They could just stay together as a group. And they said, no.
I've taught myself out of that.
They're not ready. They're not ready. But and I would miss them. But they're paying
Sure.
me. I'm not sure they need to be paying me anymore. But they are.
Very good. Well, I was about to say they're like your kids, but that is the exact opposite. The fact that they're paying you is they are not like your kids.
I have a writing workshop every Friday, and I'm very connected to these people. I couldn't imagine disbanding. I would fight against it very hard. Like,
Yeah. Well, we went to Zoom in the beginning of the pandemic, and it was a good thing because we got used to it. And then one of the people in the class moved to Baltimore, so she couldn't have kept on if we were meeting.
Right.
But now we meet on Zoom every Thursday. They bring their work, and they're goddamn good. So
Very good. Awesome. Well, thanks.
one of them is writing her first science fiction novel. She's written. Now, yeah. So I'm very excited. Yeah.
Extra shots. Question for the community. Is there such a thing as capital E evil? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to keep the conversation going on that. Any thoughts on what we talked about from a storytelling perspective? Let us know down there as well. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, if you are interested, we do have our first corporate sponsor. So if you would like to check it out, I'll include the link in the description for your 50% off of Firmoo glasses. They are affordable and stylish. And if I had them right next to me, I would put them on and you'd be like, look at that stylish, thrifty, economical man. But they are really nice glasses. I do have a pair. I wear them all the time when I'm driving, especially. So feel free to check those out. You get a discount and you get to support the show. As always, I like to mention the show is available on the go if you'd like the podcast version. So iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts, we're probably there. So check us out there. And if you do want to support us on the Mean Green Rumble machine, we have the open bar episodes on there early. So this episode will be on there before it is on the YouTubery. Final thing I want to mention, I've been trying to work the rollout of this for so long, is we now have a virtual speakeasy for you to stop by. So if you want to go to my website, it's williamrhincy.com. So William R. Hincy, Hincy.com. You can actually get all the episodes there. Sometimes the writers give us additional work. So they'll give me a short story, some poems to add in. We have all the shows plus more if you want to read the working prologue, first chapter of Pirates of Appalachia. We mentioned a little on the show. That'll be on there as well. Tons and tons of stuff, and it'll keep rolling out here. Only price is an email address. So you go in, you log in, and we won't be bothering you because I forget about ever bothering anyone. But when we do have really special announcements, we'll reach out maybe once, twice a year. So thanks so much again for all of your time, all of your support, and you guys stay saucy. Cheers, everybody.